Welcome to Commander Central, episode 190. And today we'll be talking about some workarounds for White's shortcomings in Commander. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how's quarantine treating you?
Is that you, Dana? Is that really you?
That is me. It's been a while since we've seen one another face to face.
I think the sun came out today.
It did. I actually did get outside a little bit today. I'm not, of course, near people, but walked the dog a few times in the neighborhood and did a little bit of yard work when I had a chance after actual real work. My plan tomorrow is to get my work done by the early afternoon, because I think I can. I think I'm mostly caught up, and take a nap on the porch in the sun. That's my goal.
Ooh, that sounds awesome.
When you're quarantined, you have to find those little minor victories, and that's going to be mine for tomorrow.
There you go. Mine today was looking out my pseudo office window, meaning my bedroom, and acting like a 90-year-old man on my front porch and yelling through the glass 6 feet apart as I saw people walk together down the sidewalk.
Nice.
They couldn't hear me, but if it's nice tomorrow, I might open the window and start yelling like an old crotchety
man. There you go. Well, by the time this ends, you might well be an old crotchety man.
Very well could be.
So we don't really have any games. Well, I actually have a couple games I can report on. We haven't played in person, but I did get to stream. See, this show will air on Monday, so it would have been the last Wednesday night. EDH Recast streamed a couple of games with Jason Alt, and I think we're going to try to do that every week. I'm not sure if it's going to be Jason every week or if we're going to rotate guests, but I actually did get a little bit of Commander in online. So that was fun, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that's for you to say. I mean, I tune in, being the good friend to EDH Recast and Jason, and a good co-host to you, and what do I see? You're not even using our playmat. You're using a generic Glissa one.
In my defense, I also didn't use the EDH Recast playmat. I tried to kind of thread the needle there a little bit and not show allegiance to any one specific podcast.
Well, you'd failed as Switzerland, I'll say that much. Because Matt even was like, what are you doing, buddy?
Although I think Matt had a neutral playmat too. Joey had the EDH Recast one, and Jason was rocking the Brainstorm Brewery playmat. Yep. So maybe I'll just rotate them weekly or something. We'll see.
There you go.
But the games were pretty good. We didn't really encounter too many glitches. There was a few weird things where, like, I would Song of the Dryads, something, and you couldn't really hand them the Song of the Dryads through the screen. People can't really be expected to have those tokens all on hand either. So there's a few of those, but nobody cast a Gonti or a Mindslaver or something that would have caused a lot of problems. So
yeah, that's definitely, I've been following everybody on Twitter talking about how to do playing EDH over webcams and stuff, and that's the few complaints I see is maybe you should tune your decks a little because Gonti's kind of hard to do over webcam, or, ton of bribery or search your opponent's library type things. Slows the game down and takes it away from it, I think. I
do have a Gonti in Glissa, so if I play Glissa, I'm just going to have to pull Gonti straight out of the deck. So that would be a pain in the butt. And I do run Factor Fiction in a couple decks, and I think that one's doable at least.
Right, because
you can just say what the 5 cards are, but
right, because in a real pod with people, face to face, everybody looks at them anyways. So
right. So yeah, that one would be not too bad. I played my Vela deck last night. I played Sphinxes, Vesperia, and I played Reki was the last game of the night. So we played 3 games. I think, did Joey win 2?
Oh, that's not enough scavenger grounds.
He was down. Jason knocked him down to 1 life on the last turn and couldn't finish him off, and then passed it back to him. And he was playing his Sir Conrad deck.
Ooh.
And he cast Rise of the Dark Realms with like a full yard. So like the Conrad triggers from
everything leaving.
The creatures leaving the graveyard, and then he had a sack outlet too, so he domed everybody for 13 or 14 with Rise of Dark Realms, and then could have done another 13 or 14 if he would have needed to, so that just ended it. Sphinxes won the second pod by just doing the same thing it always does, where I just
sandbag and then
just sandbagged and waited it out till the end, and Madomi came through and True Conviction somebody, and I had one of those. My hand was larger than my library situations by the end.
That's a Dana Roach special right there.
In that deck, it absolutely is. So that deck played pretty good, although on camera, I'm not sure how great it was seeing me just draw go with like 12 mana free. But hey, I got the win. Any exciting news to report here, Max? I think we got some Ikoria dates that were altered we can talk about.
We do. I don't know if we'd call this exciting, but
yeah.
So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, WotC today announced some Ikoria dates are being changed. So April 2nd, previews start. I think that's staying the same.
Yep.
April 10th, the entire card image gallery will be out on the mothership. Ikoria releases on Arena and Magic the Gathering Online on April 16th. Following that, on April 17th, Ikoria tabletop release in the Asia-Pacific markets. Unfortunately for the North America, Europe, and South America markets, the Ikoria tabletop release is being pushed back to May 15th.
Yeah, so like a full month delay basically for everyone here in the States and North America, which isn't really shocking, I guess. I'm not really surprised at that. The previews will start. See, this is a Monday show. Previews will start on Thursday, I believe. So we'll get them. I think that's roughly the same timetable we had. The Commander spoilers, I don't believe have changed. Those all start. Well, they probably have changed, but they're all being compacted into the weekend of the 4th and the 5th of March. So 6 days after the show goes live, that weekend, everything will be spoiled in those 2 days.
Yep.
So that should be a very busy weekend. And we have a preview card.
We do.
So we will be spoiling that weekend as well.
Previewing. We preview the cards.
Sorry. We will be previewing that card. You were correct. Force of habit.
Yes. Got to change the nomenclature there.
But I'm excited for it. The set looks good, and at least we'll have spoilers to talk about even if we don't actually have cards in hand for a while.
For sure.
So it'll give me plenty of time to bust out the spreadsheets and figure out what cards I'm going to put in what decks.
You have a full month to do it.
I do, and I'm stuck indoors, so why not? If you would like to reach out to us and tell us what you're doing during this quarantine time, how would you do that, Max?
You can hit us up on Twitter by searching at CMDR Central. Find us on Facebook and YouTube searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us on Patreon by searching CMDR Central.
You can also find us on flipsidegaming.com.
Yeah, use promo code CMDR in all caps to get 10% off all orders, $10 or more.
And if you'd like to support the show, what's another way they could do that, Max?
We've mentioned Patreon, but we can go over to teespring.com.
Oh, there we go. All right.
And buy yourself a Scumbags Unite t-shirt.
There we go. Well, you did say the magic words Patreon right there. I think we have a couple new supporters to mention here.
We do. We want to say thank you to John Molinari and Draco Lucian. We want to also say welcome back to both of those people.
Yeah.
Welcome back to supporting us again. We also want to say welcome to Thor, Universal Zeal, and Brandon Russell. So thank you to these new and returning patrons and all of our patrons that have stuck around since day one.
And not that I want to discourage people from not supporting us on Patreon, but like, we get it. Do not feel bad if your life situation changes so you can't support the show anymore, given what's going on in the world. Do not feel bad about that at all. Should we jump into this here, Max?
Yeah, let's get going.
So, as always, people are talking about the color white in Commander. That seems to be an ever-present topic on the Twitter birds. But I've played a mono white deck, and Max has played mono white in the past. And we're going to specifically talk about mono white here, because, like, if you're playing, most other color combinations with white that aren't Boros, there are enough workarounds for a lot of the shortcomings white has. And even in Boros nowadays, red's gotten a lot of tools that help make things way easier.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I actually, while prepping for this, I realized all but one of my decks has white in it. So
yeah, white's a great support color.
I think it's probably one of the best support colors.
I would probably agree. But solo, it has some issues. So we're going to talk about some of the workarounds for those shortcomings if you're playing mono white. So first things first, talk about ramp, and we'll just, skip past this. This is one that always kind of bugs me a little bit when people talk about white struggling with ramp. Every color struggles with ramp if they're not green. Like, green's the only color that really gets, enchantment ramp for the most part, and land ramp, and, mana dorks, and there's just a few other colors, but like, by and large, green ramps and other colors don't. Yes, white isn't great at ramp, but neither is black and red and blue. So you have the same options to ramp in white as you do in those colors, which is just mana rocks. One thing I will kind of note here, generally speaking, I tend to think you try to run 2 color rocks if possible. At least I've moved that direction. Have you kind of moved that way at all, Max?
To like the 2 CMC rocks?
Trying to, yeah.
I don't know. I really don't brew a lot of decks, so I like a few of the 3 CMC ones. But yeah, the sweet spot is definitely in that 2 range right there.
And I think that's definitely true in a mono deck, particularly, mono white, because so many of the 3 color rocks, one of their selling points is they make any color of mana. You really don't care for the most part about that in a mono deck. If your 2 color rock, 2 CMC rock in white just taps for colorless, that's almost always not a problem, because you only need white pips, and you're probably running mostly plains anyway, and it's just way easier to run efficient 2-drop rocks in a monocolor deck than it is in a 2, 3, 4, whatever color deck. So I would say that as a note. You need to run mana rocks in white. That's just what you got to do. And I would say even more so than a 2 or 3 color deck, you want to try to stick to the efficient ones because there's just not much downside.
Yeah.
One thing nice about mono decks is there's a couple different cards that reduce the casting cost of spells of that color. So we're talking about Pearl Medallion and Oketra's Monument in particular. Monument's pretty cheap. Pearl Medallion's like $7, so it's not awful, but it's not, efficient either in terms of how hard it hits your wallet. But those are cards that reduce the colorless mana cost of white spells in the case of Pearl Medallion and white creature spells in the case of Oketra's Monument. That's really nice because it lets you get the reduction multiple times a turn. If you, play a 2-mana rock, you can only use it for mana once for the most part, unless you're untapping something. If you're using a color reducer like Pearl Medallion, you might be able to use that 3 times a turn depending on what you're casting. So myself, in a mono white deck, I think if you can get one, Pearl Medallion's a fantastic card. And those are much trickier to run outside a monocolor deck.
Very true. And, some people might scoff at the Oketra's Monument only affecting creature spells, but the nice thing about it is you get rewarded because when you cast a creature spell of any color, even though we're only talking mono white, you're making a token. So in mono white, you're making a 1/1 warrior token. That fits right into most mono white strategies of making tokens are the go wide, white weenie strategies.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, especially in white as a color that tends to be your win condition as creature beats. It's not like it's a really mono white for the most part isn't known for combo synergy. So you tend to be running a bunch of creatures anyway, and it's just synergizes very nicely with that. Mana doublers work pretty good in any monocolor deck, and they, work well in white too. You want to tell us about those, Max?
Yeah, so we'll start off with probably the most known one being Extraplanar Lens. This is the reason people run Snowlands in their monocolor decks because it imprints that land's name, not just planes. So when you're running Snow Basics and nobody else is, you get the effect over everybody else.
It's also cheap. Cheap in terms of casting cost. You lose a land for it because you have to imprint it, but 3 mana to cast makes it really easy to cast that turn, and then as long as it resolves, even if someone goes to blow it up right away, worst case scenario, you can still tap the rest of your lands and get the double mana out of them, whereas the next couple we're going to talk about here, it's much tougher when you're paying 5 or 6 to have that mana free that turn to still use a lot of times to take up your whole turn.
Yeah, the next one on the list is Gauntlet of Power. This is that 5 mana rock. You choose a color as it comes into play, and this actually helps everybody on the table.
Yep. Yes.
So creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1, and then whenever a basic land is tapped for mana of that color, its controller adds 1 additional to his or her mana pool. So this is one that helps the entire table, so you better be able to capitalize sooner than your opponents.
Although I would say, as someone who runs this in my mono blue deck and my mono white deck, the amount of times that really matters is pretty negligible. The advantage I get almost always just vastly outweighs the advantage somebody else gets. I mean, on occasion, are you going to be playing in a deck where somebody else is playing the same monocolor deck? Sure. But for the most part, it just almost is just a non-existent downside.
Yeah. And the fact that this only hits basics helps against those 2-color, 3-color decks that tend to run less basics, especially if white is the support color.
Yeah, for sure.
So our final one is Caged Sun. This is a 6-mana artifact. It enters the battlefield, choose a color. But unlike Gauntlet, this only helps you. So your creatures get the +1/+1, and whenever a land's ability causes you to add 1 of that mana, add an additional 1. So this one helps with your dual lands. If you are in 2 colors.
And buffs your creatures, which is useful in mono white, and doesn't help anybody else. But the 6 mana is a lot. However, this is also the cheapest one to pick up.
Purchase.
The problem with all of these is Caged Sun's 10, Gauntlet of Power is 20, Lens is 30. So none of them are cheap, but at the very least, Caged Sun is the cheapest of the 3.
Yeah. Is that 1 extra mana worth it only helping you? In mono white?
I would say, I don't know if it's necessarily worth it or better. It tends to feel like a situation where if you want one, you probably want both.
Do you run all 3 in Dejeru?
I have all 3 in my Zero deck.
That makes sense.
I don't know if that necessarily would apply to all mono white decks, just because it kind of has card draw in a way that most decks don't. When I play the commander, goes and gets a Planeswalker. I can blink Zero to go get Planeswalker, so I have ways to maybe kind of pseudo-draw cards that most white decks don't have, so I can utilize that mana. And I also have a lot of things in the deck that do proliferate effects that are activated abilities and artifacts that cost mana, so I have a lot of mana sinks as well in that deck that I don't know if a lot of mono white decks do have, but I absolutely run all three, and I never ever regret that. Even if I have multiples out at once, I still always use the mana.
Yeah, and your Zero deck is a slower deck compared to maybe someone that wants to go the aggro route in white weenies or something. Yep. So what about land ramp, Dana? What do we have for mono white there?
Well, so, we mentioned, I said before, all colors are hurting for ramp that aren't green. I said that, but that's not actually 100% true. White probably has the second best land ramp behind green. It actually does have cards that do ramp you lands. Knight of the White Orchid, it only works if someone has more lands than you, but you can go get any planes with it if someone does when it comes into play and put that into play. It's not just a basic plane. It can go get something like a Mistveil Plains that has the plane subtype. That's a pretty decent card. That right there alone is more land ramp than most other colors that aren't green have. You have Core Cartographer that costs 4 versus 2 for Knight of the White Orchid, but it doesn't care about your opponents having more lands than you in play. You can just go get a plains and put it into play.
I love this card so much. I used to run it all the time in Brago. It was so good.
And it's any plains. You can go get that Mistveil Plains if you want to. You can go get, if it happens to be a dual color deck, you could go get a dual land as well. And it's also cheap. It's like $1.
Oh, for sure.
Versus Knight of the White Orchid, which is like $5. Obviously, there's Solemn Simulacrum, which everyone has access to, but, it's something you can run there. There's Borealis Charger, which again kind of cares about whether someone has more lands than you. But if multiple players do, you can get multiple planes into play there. Oath of Lieges works for everyone. It's an old enchantment. And basically, if someone has more lands than you, you can go get lands and put them into play. I've never ran it, and I feel like I don't need to... I would rather run a Mana Rock that just helps me than I would help everyone else catch up if they're behind. But it's an option.
Yeah, that's a really weird enchantment.
Yeah, I mean, it's way back, it's 20 years old at this point, but some people might want that effect. So maybe you can argue that it does work in a way that gives you a little bit of political power at the table. So if that's the way you play and where your meta works, that might work well for you as well. Sort of the Animist. I mean, a lot of white decks care about equipment and have things that interact with equipment, but even if you don't, 2 mana to cast that and 2 mana to equip it to go get a land whenever your creature swings, and it doesn't have to hit, it just has to swing.
Yes, totally. An attack trigger is way more beneficial than a non-combat damage trigger. That's
pretty decent. So that's definitely an option, and it's obviously colorless. Any deck can run it, but in mono white especially, that's pretty solid.
Mm-hmm.
And the last two I'll mention, because I've used at least Path of Exile for this, but some of the wreckage would work too. There are situations where you can use those 2 cards to ramp. They let the creature's controller go get basic land into play. If someone board wipes and you're like, well, I'll ramp off this, or goes to kill your creatures, take control of your creatures or whatever. That might not be the best use of those cards, but there are situations where that makes sense.
I've done it with Settle. I've exiled a token army. So
yep, I've seen you do it with Settle when you're going to lose everything anyway, so why not just ramp way ahead? I've definitely done it myself to path to a token or to a creature that someone's tried to take control of too. So I wouldn't run those for that reason specifically, but bear in mind that's a pretty good flex to use them if you need to have that option. It's there.
Right.
And obviously the last one here, it's really the only piece of enchantment ramp, Smothering Tithe, that makes you the treasure tokens.
Trash card.
It is definitely a here's the thing about Smothering Tithe that's kind of, I wouldn't say interesting, but a lot of the cards we're talking about are specifically cards that you would run in a white deck maybe, and you probably necessarily wouldn't run them anywhere else. Maybe sort of the Animist or something, but Smothering Tithe is probably good in a 5-color deck.
I run it in my 3-color deck.
Yeah, it's I almost don't think of it as a white card. It's just a great card.
Yeah.
Obviously fantastic. It's up to $8 right now, so I guess maybe I should say down to $8. I think it was more than that at one point.
Gross.
But clearly a great card.
Yeah.
So since we just discussed land ramp, which is the act of actually putting lands into play beyond the one you have per turn, one thing white does pretty well is it puts lands into your own hand. And while that's not necessarily going to get you ahead, it guarantees that you hit those land drops every single turn. And because white doesn't have great draw, that's trickier to do in white than it is in some other colors where, in like in black, you can just cast a Night's Whisper or Sign in Blood and probably hit your land drop, or blue has enough filtering effects to get down. Red's got enough impulse draw. You can probably use those effects to hit your land drops fairly consistently. White really doesn't have those options. So the lands to hand thing where you go get a plane and put it in your hand is much more valuable in white than that ability would be somewhere else, I think. Now, did you run any of these effects when you were playing mono white, Max?
I ran Gift of Estates because it was cheap.
Yeah, and I think it came in one of the precons at one point, too.
But even back when I had my mono white deck, I didn't have a land tax or like Endless Horizons. That's the one that you pull as many points out of your deck as you want, and then you can... I didn't run that either, just because that's kind of risky. If someone destroys it, you're out all your mana or whatever you pulled out. I mean, and to be clear, I had this mono white deck 2 years ago, so some of these cards didn't exist yet.
Yeah, the Birth of Meletus was not around. I don't think Restless Explorer was around then either.
So it was more just my land count in my deck was up. Like, I think I ran 37 or 38 lands in a mono white deck, knowing that if I get flooded, I'd rather be flooded in mono white than land hosed.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, Gift of Estates is a good one. Sorcery speed, but it's only 2 mana, and you can go put planes into your hand. Tithe is a really good old card from Visions, I want to say. I guess I don't have it open in front of me to verify that.
Yep,
it was Visions. 1 mana instant speed, and you can go get a plane, and if someone has more lands than you can get 2 planes. For 1 mana, that's super, super efficient, and it lets you hold up that, Swords to Plowshares mana early, drop it on turn 1, and then wait till the person who's, going first the second time around the table plays their land drop, and then you can cast it to guarantee your landfall before it even comes back to you, versus having to do it on your own turn. It's $11, but in mono white, I think Tithe is a really underplayed card. And I would say people probably don't know it exists either. Like, it's $11, so it isn't cheap, and it's old and on the reserve list. I would say a lot of players aren't even aware it's a card.
I mean, I kind of forget it is until I see you cast it.
Right, yeah. Then you have land tax that lets you go get 3 planes every turn, but it's $25. That's the problem. Like one,
and that's with a reprint from 2 years ago, when Battle Bond came out.
And it was worse than that at one point in time, so it's down to 25, I guess, but that's still a lot of money. But what's nice about land tax is if you happen to have a scroll rack, the ability in mono white to go grab 3 planes, even if you don't need them, and then scroll rack them back to the top of your library, and then next turn use land, basically essentially drawing 3 cards, and then next turn use the land tax trigger to basically get a free shuffle, to shuffle those lands away, go grab 3 more planes, put them back on top with scroll rack, draw 3 more cards. I mean, it's a beautiful draw engine if you have the, $90 worth of cards to run it. So scroll rack definitely needs a reprint, but if you have one or can get one, that's a fantastic draw workaround in mono white as well if you happen to have the land tax.
There is one creature. We forgot one creature. It's pretty old.
Which one is that?
We forgot Weathered Wayfarer.
Oh, yeah.
This is the 1/1 cleric. You can pay white and tap it to search your library for a land card and reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And you can only do it if an opponent controls more lands than you. So same land tax trigger, but any land. That's always nice.
Yeah, and it's only 1 mana.
And most white decks run stuff like Top just so they can dig past those clumps of land when they set up, for the late game. This works really well with those type of strategies too.
And the fact that it's any land can be really, really important here too.
Go get that Strip Mine or Ghost Quarter or your Scavenger Grounds.
Or your Nykthos if you're lucky enough to have one in mono white, because odds are you got a bunch of white pips out there.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a good one as well. So lands to hand is important. We mentioned that. How about workarounds for draw in mono white, Max?
Ooh, I think we're gonna be leaning in on some artifacts again here, Dana.
Yeah, pretty much.
Some notable ones are Staff of Nin, Mind's Eye, Endless Atlas from the Commander Precons a couple years ago. If you control 2 or more lands with the same name.
Yes.
Or is it 3?
It's 2.
2. You can.
Well, you know what? I say that.
I think you have to control 3, and it costs 2 to tap.
Yes, that's what it is. It costs 2 to cast, 2 to tap, and you have to control 3 or more lands with the same name. That's correct.
And then you pay 2, you tap it, you draw a card. That's a great turn 2 play right there. Land, Soul Ring, land that. You're set on turn 3.
I am always happy to see it in my mono white deck for sure.
Yep. Then there's the Immortal Sun from Rivals of Ixalan. It pumps all your creatures, lets you draw an additional card. Does shut planeswalkers off, which white has quite a few good ones, but
Yeah.
that's a small downside for what this card's going to do for you at 6 mana. One of my pet cards, Tamio's Journal, it just makes you a clue every turn.
Yeah.
It's slow, but it does, if it's left unattended, you can either crack those clues to draw or sack 3 and tutor anything you want.
And then Tome of Legends out of Throne of Eldraine has been really good in my mono white deck as well. It enters the battlefield with a page counter on it. It's 2 mana to cast. Whenever your commander enters battlefield or attacks, put a page counter on it, and then you can spend 1 mana to remove a page counter and draw a card. So you need to have some way, you have to hope your commander attacks, or it has to be a commander that you recast to consistently use it, but like, you're going to get 1 use out of it the first time. Then if you cast your commander or swing it, it's actually relatively easy to keep counters on it often enough. So, it's not like Jiru has evasion or anything, but I still manage to attack with him plenty often to keep counters on it. And it's not cast, enters the battlefield for your commander. So if you have, if you're playing a deck where you blink your commander or something, I don't think
Who would do that?
Well, and I don't know if in a Brago deck where you have so many draw effects that you want an artifact for 2 that you can spend 1 on, even if it's every single turn. I don't know if that's something you care about particularly, but I don't know. Even then, I think it's not maybe bad in that deck.
You're literally like in my head right now because I'm literally trying to justify, okay, if I play this on turn 2, turn 3, I can remove the counter, then play Brago, it gets the counter.
Or just every time you blink it, it's going to get a new counter on it. So basically it's going to wind up being just 1 mana to draw a card, maybe multiple times a turn. There's probably enough other there's probably enough other blue creatures that like draw you a card in ETB that are maybe easier to use and or creatures, but it's close, I think.
I mean, 3 mana, draw a card with the possibility to abuse it. It's always going to be 1 mana to draw the card.
Right, which is nice. And it's tougher to remove than a creature. It's going to stick around through board wipes.
At least 5. Yeah, this might be worth trying.
Sure.
I know what I'm doing this weekend.
Well, it's been very good in my mono white deck. So they have done a decent job addressing some of white's draw with artifacts in particular the last couple of years. So yeah, those are all really solid. Staff of Nin is one I think that maybe nowadays isn't quite as useful as it was 3 years ago just because it costs 6 mana.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of one of those like starter cards.
A little bit, yeah.
Because it's been in a few precons.
Yep.
I think people go from Staff of Nin to maybe like Mind's Eye, and then from Mind's Eye to the Immortal Sun, or, some weird progression like that.
Sure.
As the internet yells at me because I don't know what I'm talking about.
What else do we have here for white draw options that aren't just artifacts?
How about Planeswalkers?
There's a couple of them.
Yeah, so we have Karn, Sign of Urza. You can reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent exiles 1. You get to keep 1. With the ability to maybe later bring that card from exile back to your hand, right?
Yes.
And then we also have Ugin the Ineffable, who makes you manifest the top card, it makes it a spirit. When it dies, you get to put that card into your hand.
Those, Karn especially, I think, for 4 mana to draw what is probably the worst of the 2 cards, but still, it's repeated draw, has some extra utility. 4 is pretty efficient. I think Karn is a really good just draw option in mono white. But Ugin's not bad either. I put Ugin in that Zero deck just because when you're playing mono white Planeswalkers, the pickings get pretty slim. So I just was like, well, I'll try Ugin out because why not? The cost reduction on colorless spells is really, really useful, particularly in a mono deck like mono white, where you're running like we said, a bunch of artifacts that are draw engines and a bunch of mana rocks for your ramp sources. There's been a bunch of different games where I've played Ugin and then just went like, okay, I'm playing this Arcane Signet for free, and I'm playing this Felwar Stone for free, and then I'm going to tap that Felwar Stone to play this other thing for 1 mana because it's reduced by 2. It's quite good in addition to just being something that makes a body that you can jump block with and then draw a card.
Yeah.
So I like Ugin quite a bit as well. But there's a few other creatures here that I think, is Dawn of Hope one that I've seen you run in decks, Max?
Yeah, Dawn of Hope is a 2 mana enchantment. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 2 generic mana and draw a card. Well, a lot of creatures in white have lifelink. That is kind of a sub-theme that, a lot of the little warriors or soldiers have, angels have it. And you can spend 4 mana to make a 1/1 soldier with lifelink token as well. So it kind of fuels itself if your big bodies with lifelink fall off the battlefield.
And then we have an artifact we didn't mention here under the artifact because it's not really an engine. Well, I mean, it's an engine, but it's not like a, tap effect or something. That's Skull Clamp. You mentioned making tokens with Dawn of Hope. There's a ton of planeswalkers in mono white that make weenies. White weenies is just kind of a theme in general in white, and the ability to clamp one of those Elspeth tokens for 1 mana and draw 2 cards is disgusting. I don't know if you can run Skull Clamp in every deck, but maybe you can. Like I for the 1 it costs and the 1 to equip, you don't need to lose many creatures before it's just paid for itself.
I mean, whenever I attempt to try to build a mono white deck, it's always in the starting 10 cards I think about.
Like if you just put it on 1 creature and then a board wipe happens, that's probably worth the 2 mana you've paid to put it on and then equip it. Even if you don't have the ability to kill the creature because it's like a 2/2 or something. Like the worst case scenario, it's probably going to pay for itself, let alone if you've got a bunch of 1/1s that you can clamp and kill.
Oh, for sure. And it does help that white has quite a few ways to tutor artifacts, either to the top of your library, to your hand. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say it could go in 85% of mono white decks.
Probably, yeah. And that's a good point. Mention the tutors here as well. With a lot of these draw things being tied to artifacts and white being able to tutor up artifacts, that's a nice little bit of synergy there too. It's tempting to, say I'm going to slot in this Enlightened Tutor just to go get a draw card in white because you need to draw that badly. That's probably worth your 1 mana to do as well. So then we get into things like Mentor the Meek, speaking of weenies, where you can spend a mana whenever a small creature comes into play and draw a card. Mentor the Meek also probably goes in a ton of white decks.
Oh, for sure.
And of course, the card people have been clamoring for that does not exist in Paper Magic, only in Arena, is Inspiring Commander, which is just kind of a larger variant of Mentor the Meek.
Yeah, it's 4 white for I think it's a 2/2 or a 3/3, but it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life and draw a card. Okay.
Yeah, that's really decent. And the last one here I'm going to mention is Inheritance. It's a 1 white enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, you may pay 3, and if you do, draw a card. It's an old enchantment from way back in Alliances. It's not amazing, but I don't know. 1 white mana is all it costs to cast it, and it's not your creatures. It's whenever a creature dies, you can spend 3 and draw a card. I've put it in a couple different attempts at building decks and then wound up taking it out at the last second, and I do not currently run it in Jeru, but I probably should try it because I think it's probably better than it looks. So that might be a challenge thing I do here whenever I get the chance to play again, is try Inheritance in my Jeru deck. So there's also the last one I'll mention here. We mentioned Path to Exile and Star of the Wreckage as kind of workarounds for ramp. I think Oblation is a really good card. It's 3 mana to basically shuffle a creature into its owner's library, and then that creature's controller draws 2 cards, which doesn't feel great necessarily, giving them 2 draw spells. However, if you're playing a token deck or something, the ability to just basically treat it like a Costly Plunder where you sacrifice a creature and draw 2 cards, it's a 1 more mana Costly Plunder that also has the option that if that Blightsteel Colossus gets sneak attacked in and it's swinging at you, you can just shuffle it away. I think people see that draw 2 for your opponent thing and don't want to run it. And I think the way you want to look at it is it's a draw spell that forces you to sacrifice a creature that has the option to save your butt if you need a instant speed creature removal spell that hits even things that are indestructible. So I think Oblation's actually kind of underappreciated, and in mono white I run it, and absolutely I think there's going to have to be a whole bunch of good cards that come out before I would pull it out of my deck. Last kind of but not least here isn't really draw and it's not really ramp. It's just kind of what I would call generically resource advantage, and that consists generally speaking of bringing things back from the graveyard, so stuff you've already lost that you can get back. And there's quite a few effects in white that do that too. Why don't we go over these here, Max?
Yeah, so we have Face Reward, Brought Back, Sun Titan, Savine's Reclamation, Replenish, Amiria Shepherd, and then a handful of lands, Heliod's Hall of Generosity, or Hall of Heliod's Generosity, either way, Mistfill Plains, and Amiria the Sky Ruin.
And those are lands that are not, I guess, white, but they have to be in a white deck. So
yeah.
Sun Titan is obviously pretty well known. That's one of the most popular cards in white, just period. And you run it at the very least in your Brago deck.
I do. It's so much fun.
Is it in RNK too?
No, it is not.
It's not, okay. Yeah, Sun Titan's no secret, but it's a fantastic card. And does a whole lot of work to make up for white not having much draw. So let's talk about Faith's Reward and Brought Back briefly. Faith's Reward is 4 mana, and you return to play all permanents or put in your graveyard this turn. Brought Back only costs 2, but you only bring back 2 things. Those are both really cheap. I just put Brought Back into my Zero deck, and I've not had a chance to play with it yet. My thought process there being it's pretty easy to leave 2 mana open, and there's enough times when like either I blow up my own Planeswalker to do something or someone else hits it, and I'm like 2 mana to leave open to then say, before the end of your turn, I'm going to bring back that Elspeth you killed and that Ugin you killed.
Ooh.
So I'm going to try it out. I was going to try Faith's Reward, but I feel like in white, it's really tough to leave 4 mana available, but 2 is way easier. So I'm going to try Brought Back out, but really both of those in certain situations are really solid cards. And Replenish. How many games has that card won you in your Enchantress deck?
At least half.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I've never seen it not just kill somebody.
I mean, if it's not Replenish, the sorcery speed one from Time Spiral.
Oh, Retether.
Retether, yep.
Yeah, in somewhere, like if you're playing Enchantress, those are really, really good cards. But even if you're not necessarily, like there's just tends to be enough enchantment activity going on in white sometimes that it might be good enough to run.
You know, the same can be said for Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Yeah. We've said that on past shows. You know, is it worth finding, slotting your lands for that? If you run True Conviction in maybe like a Mirari's Wake, or in a mono white deck, True Conviction in Divine Visitation, or Cathar's Crusade and something. Like, how many enchantments does it really take to designate a land slot to it?
I'm running Hall in both my Zero deck for that purpose, because there's enough enchantments to make a big difference in that deck. And I now have it in my Asperia deck. And it didn't come out when I played on stream this week, but I think the last night we played in the shop, I used it to bring back a heuristic study on one turn, and the following turn I got, it wasn't True Conviction, but it's something like that. I have not regretted having that deck either. So particularly like a 2-color deck, but definitely in a 1-color deck, there's just not a lot of downside, and mono white, a lot of mono white decks rely on those enchantments for win conditions, whether it's Cathar's Crusade, like you said, or True Conviction, and having the option to bring them back on a land that's just sitting there is really, really useful. Emiria Shepherd is a card I ran for a while in Zero, and I don't anymore, where it has landfall and you can return a card from your graveyard to your hand. But if the land is a plane, you return it to play. It's 7 mana, but like that's a really good effect in mono white. And the one thing that I didn't really think of when I ran it, so that, okay, well, occasionally I'll get like one thing back from my graveyard into play. That's great. If it goes to my hand, that's good too. I was running Myriad Landscape in the deck, and I wasn't even like doing the math. I'm like, okay, I'll, Myriad Landscape. I'm like, oh, I get to bring 2 things back straight into play because I brought 2 planes into play this turn. And then at one point, I ulted an Ugin, the original Ugin, where you draw 7 cards and put 7 permanents into play. And I just happened to, of those permanents, like I didn't have 7 planeswalkers in hand. I had like 2 planeswalkers and, 4 planes and something else, which then let me get the landfall triggers off Emiria Shepherd, and then bring 4 walkers from my graveyard back into play.
Oh, that's just mean, Dana. That doesn't get taken apart.
Now, that's not, how it works every single time, but like in mono white, that's pretty decent. There are workarounds is what we're saying here. They don't work every time, but there are a few in white. So that's a lot of stuff we talked about, but I'm curious what we missed, whether either because it's accidental or we just don't know the cards exist. So as a mono white player here, myself, if there's anything we didn't talk about that you think is a really good addition to a deck, for sure let us know. I'd like to hear from any listeners about workarounds that you have in your mono white decks. Any final thoughts here, Max?
No, I think we covered a lot of the major ones.
Yeah.
Mono white is mono white. It's a tough color to play, but the people who do play it really enjoy it because they find that unique thing. Like you have Jajeru, or, there's just a Angel Tribal. There's enough things to make white interesting. I think it just needs a little more support, and maybe we'll get that in the Year of Commander.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And the challenge is sometimes fun too. Like when you're walking uphill both ways is sometimes part of the fun for some people. That it kind of is for me with the Jeru. So just because it's bad just because it's perhaps the weakest mono color doesn't mean it's not fun to try to find ways to win. It's very satisfying, I have found, beating someone with a mono white planeswalker deck. Even if it doesn't win as much as something else, I do find that more satisfying than winning with, say, a Simic deck or something. So So looking forward to hearing from all of you out there. We will be back on Thursday with a Deck Tech. I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. You can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. You can find our show's editor, Rafael Garcia, at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next Thursday, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.